All right, let's get today started. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emily Sams. I use she, her pronouns, and I have had the immense privilege to be the Women's March Ottawa co-chair for 2021. First and foremost, I would like to begin this event with a land acknowledgement. Women's March Ottawa acknowledges that we organize, work, and live on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. While we know that land acknowledgements are growing more common, we also want to use this time as an opportunity to be intentional and thoughtful in the way that we position ourselves and provide meaningful and thankful acknowledgement of the Indigenous communities whose lands we occupy. As we organize around feminist issues, we recognize the importance of ensuring this work is both anti-racist and decolonial in nature. We recognize the ways in which our presence on this land upholds colonialism and reproduces dispossession and violence of Indigenous peoples. For those of us who are settlers, we commit to working and learning more about how we can prioritize the rights of Indigenous peoples and encourage participants to consider this during and after today's session. So, a little bit about Women's March Ottawa before we officially start. Formed in 2017, Women's March Ottawa is an Ottawa-based and entirely volunteer-run feminist organization. We are committed to challenging all forms of systemic discrimination, bias, and oppression. We also believe unwaveringly in building an inclusive feminist movement that centers Indigenous, Black, racialized, disabled, low-income, young, old, newcomer, refugee, and 2S LGBTQ+ women and gender diverse people. While traditionally our programming has consisted of a yearly march for gender equity and justice, this year we're going to be, or we have been shifting our programming. So that's both in a response to COVID-19 and in order to ensure that our work is expanding our reach. So we've brought together feminists from across Canada and truly globally to engage in a free week of online programming designed to bring feminists together to discuss a range of timely and important issues. So while today, unfortunately, is our final event for our 2021 program, we encourage you all to follow us on social media. We're at Ottawa March on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So that's in order to ensure that you stay in the loop about upcoming events. And we're also incredibly grateful for any financial donations that you may be able to offer in order to support both this programming and future Women's March Ottawa events. Thank you so much to the Canadian Federation of Nurses Union, Rogers, Councillor Teresa Kavanagh, and our generous individual donors for supporting this week of events. You can also find all of the information posted both on our website, we're womensmarchottawa.ca, as well as in the chat below. For today's session, we're here to finish off our 2021 spring programming with a keynote speech by a truly incredible speaker. And I'll introduce Gina in just a moment. Following the Q&A or following the keynote speech, we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A. So please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A function on Zoom or in the Zoom chat. Just one note that while we greatly appreciate any comments and questions that you may have, we will be implementing a policy to ensure that this space is safe and respectful. So any comments or behavior that is hateful or disrespectful in nature will result in you being removed from this webinar. And finally, for those who wish to use it, the closed captioning is available for your use through Zoom. So let me introduce you to our fantastic keynote speaker, Gina Wilson. Gina Wilson is the Deputy Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, the acting Deputy Minister for Canadian Heritage, and the Deputy Minister Champion for Indigenous Federal Employees. Ms. Wilson was appointed as Deputy Minister for Women and Gender Equality, formerly known as Status of Women Canada, on May 23rd, 2017, where she led the creation of a new department and ensured that GBA Plus, or Gender-Based Analysis Plus, is fully instituted in the government. In 2019, Gina was appointed as Deputy Minister of Public Safety Canada and returned to the department for the third time. Gina Wilson is an Algonquin, an Algonquin and began her career in her First Nation community of Kitigan-Zibi as Executive Director of Health and Social Services. She joined the federal government in 1996 and has held several senior executive positions at several departments, including the Privy Council Office, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, and Employment and Social Development Canada. Gina is the recipient of the 2020 Indspire Award for her leadership and lifelong work on Indigenous issues and supporting Indigenous employees. Gina has 3 beautiful children, Dylan, Kayla, and Royce, and treasures her granddaughter, Charlotte. We're honored to have Gina here today to speak about her reflections on feminism, her career as a trailblazer in the Canadian Federal Public Service, and a feminist recovery from COVID-19, among other topics. Now, I'll turn it over to you, Gina. Thank you so very much for being here today.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. Thank you, Emily. Greetings. Hello. Bonjour, Kwe. I also want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the land of my ancestors, the Algonquin people. So on behalf of them and our current day people, I say welcome, bienvenue, and pijashig. Pijashig is Algonquin for welcome. It's great to see the rain outside. It's great to know that we're nourishing the flowers and the grass. And I hope everyone is staying well and staying safe, getting vaccinated and so on. I hear you've had a chock full week of things going on, and I want to acknowledge the organizers and all of their work, and the Emilys, and I want to thank Deborah Davis for thinking of me to come and stop by today. It is definitely always an honor to be asked. It's an honor for me to be here. I was going to talk about my life and experiences, but I thought this morning my grandmother came to my mind, and I said, in the spirit of Mother's Day weekend, and for grandmothers and aunties and your cousins and godmothers, my own mother, I thought I'd talk a little bit about my grandmother. And her name was Louise Brazo McDougall. And she told me a story about her grandmother. And this is goes back quite a ways. Her grandmother, she said, had some red hair, mixed into her black hair, and she was feeling the encroachment of people coming to Maniwaki, settlers, and she was getting really upset about it. And her grandmother used to take off in the bush for months at a time. Sometimes she'd be gone by herself for like 4 months, trapping and just living off the land. And she said she was a very stubborn, strong woman. And I laughed as I thought about that, looking at my grandmother telling me that story about how she was kind of complaining about how stubborn and strong she was. And that's exactly how she was. So Louise McDougall, my grandmother, she raised 5 girls and a boy who was the youngest. That was my father. And they lived off the land as well. They lived in a shack near a lake in the community, and life was hard, from what I understand. But my grandmother probably made me feel the most safest ever was when I was with her, and sleeping with her, and her holding me was probably the most comforting place I've ever been in my life to this day. And so as you think of your grandmothers today, and know that they're with you and they're near you, and their spirits are here today. And I want to thank all of the grandmothers that you have. She used to give my dad shit a lot, and I always, as a kid, thought that was kind of funny, that when he was getting heck from his mother about something, she used to also give him heck about not teaching me the language, because he had come from a generation where it was much better to be speaking English and French because, you know, you'll get a job and you'll join society and so on. So when I didn't speak Algonquin, and when she'd ask me a question and I couldn't fully comprehend what she would say, you know, she'd give them heck. And but I did learn some Algonquin from her because she sometimes refused to speak to me any other language, so I had to try to understand. She was an expert at a tea boiling contest. She could boil tea faster than anyone. That means a contest in our community where, you know, somebody starts a fire and whoever gets the tea boiling first, you know, should make her own soap. She was very, very dedicated to the church, and she was in charge of meals in the community hall when there was weddings or funerals. She started something called the Homemakers Club, which was a group of women who came together and they made quilts, but you might have heard of organizations like that across the country, but she spearheaded the Homemakers Club. She spearheaded an association, a cooperative in the community called Wadub Handicrafts, because she's seen how women were making a lot of crafts in the community, and she wanted them to benefit economically. So she started a cooperative. She used to visit women in the community. I remember this. She used to actually head out when she knew that another woman in the community was either being abused, beaten, or very left in very poor circumstances. She would, and I went a couple of times with her to those houses, and she would help those women clean their house, and she would talk to them if they had a black eye or you know, fat lip, about, you know, how they needed to stand up for themselves and how they needed to get out of that situation. And she started something called the seniors residence in the community, and really pushed hard for that. And I have to laugh a bit because you know, women in her time certainly weren't going to run for politics or become leaders, but every single chief was afraid of her. They were scared of her. You know, she had this way about her. And around me, she was very, very assertive about respect yourself. You know, respect who you are. She was very. You know, she didn't let me wear certain clothing. Maybe your grandmothers were the same too. You know, you couldn't wear a shirt that was too provocative and or shorts, you know. And I always wondered whether that was because it was about respect yourself, or whether she was just protective, because she was very protective when it came to abuse around me. So if a man came up to me, an older man, to kind of talk to me and say, "Oh, that's your granddaughter," she would just stare them down with these eyes like, "Don't you talk to her," you know, like it was, and I felt that sense, not to be afraid, but this was not a good thing, right? So she had a lot of those teachings that really protected me and my life, and very much was one to be a proponent of community involvement. So I went to a lot of community events with her and watched her lead. So, you know, I think a lot of what I've done in my life had to do with a lot of what she taught me in her life, to feel good about myself. And I truly, truly believe that for women and girls and two-spirited people. And that's where some of the work that I do comes into play. My own little career journey, oh geez, I'm almost over time, but my own, you know, tough circumstances, but definitely felt an ability to achieve. Wanted to get out of the reserve really badly when I was young, because of a lot of issues there, but wanted to go back. And I went to work on a family violence program in the community. That was my first job, was a survey on family violence. I worked on a crisis shelter, Wasaya House, which was the first crisis shelter in the Algonquin community in the region, and exists to this day. And I worked on things like a women's circle, lots of lessons learned throughout the years. I could share those more as we chat in the Q&A. But really, closing messages, just to wrap it up here, is, you know, people talk about Indigenous people, that they revere and respect and honor their elders. That's absolutely true. I know that, to this day, a lot of our young people are continuing to go to our elders to seek wisdom and their guidance. I think for any movement, elders should be important. I think for the women's movement, we should look at and honor and respect and find ways to give the elders of the women's movement their profile and so on. I believe in girls and investment in girls and their self-esteem. I think we would go a long way to ending this tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls if we invested in young girls. I was really happy with my department that we got some money in the budget for Indigenous women, Indigenous girls sports. Really happy about that, and just want to wish you all resilience and wellness. Right here, this is the medicine wheel behind me, and that's what I use for my own resilience and taking care of myself. It's not a religious symbol. It's a tool and it's a teaching. And so I wish you well today, and I wish you good journeys going forward. I'm happy to take questions and just get some comments and feedback, and let's have a conversation. Please ask me anything. I'm very open to whatever's on your mind. So with that, I say thank you and merci and miigwech. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Gina, and I apologize. I was having some technical difficulties, so if you see me twice or anything, I so sorry. I know we're a year into this pandemic, and Zoom continues to find ways to keep us on our toes. So my apologies.
But
I
great.
do just want to say thank you so much. I have loved hearing about the women in your life and hearing about your grandmother, and just all of the incredible people that you have learned from throughout your life. So thank you to Chloe for saying that for folks, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. But maybe we'll start off. So in your introduction, I mentioned that you were the recipient of a 2020 Indspire Award. And Indspire is a national Indigenous organization devoted to encouraging Indigenous students to access and persist in post-secondary education. And more and more in today's society, it seems like post-secondary education and education in general is a huge form of empowerment for folks, and specifically for women and Indigenous women. So maybe I was wondering if you could speak to the power of education and the power of community knowledge.
Absolutely. So I would say that education was, like everyone, a big factor in our lives. Teachers are a big factor in our lives as well. We remember our teachers. We spend so much time with them and we know them, and so a lot of what we are today, we need to attribute to those teachers who helped us to move us along in life. I would say that for First Nations, education is probably one of the most important investments we can make is in our young people. And in my community, we definitely, thought that was the first place we would go in terms of focusing our priority. And so we took control of our education back in late 70s, early 80s, when we started to take on jurisdiction. I would say that there was a time when young people didn't graduate as much. I was one of the fortunate ones. I didn't go to school on reserve. I went to school in the town of Maniwaki, but I did okay. And certainly, increasingly kids are doing much better in my community. We have so many more graduates every year, and it's always so inspiring to see those numbers go up as people go on to post-secondary education you know, despite the struggles they have, you know, they're overcoming in many cases. So it's truly important for so many reasons, and I know that you feel the same way.
Absolutely. I think that what you have mentioned is so important, that it is, you know, a huge form of empowerment, and every year more and more Indigenous students are graduating. So thank you. I see that we have a comment, so I'll just read that out. Sorry, just as I pull it up here. All right, so I'll read this first question. So, as a famous 5 nation builder, you are an inspiration to Indigenous and non-Indigenous persons. How did you face and overcome obstacles in your life? So thank you, Beatrice, for your question.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, obstacles. I would say that the early obstacles were, you know, the home not exactly being a good environment to grow up in. For a while it was, but I would say in my teenage years, you know, there was a lot of parties in the house. There was a lot of alcohol and violence, and so that became a real, you know, deterrent from, you know, what would be a good life growing up, I suppose. What I did is I probably just tried to bear down and stay safe. Again, you know, thinking of my grandmother's protective eyes and how she would want me to behave. I did spend time with extended family, so and that would be of my own volition. So trying to surround myself with people who were of a good mind and a good soul and a good heart. And definitely, you know, just trying to stay focused on what was positive. So for me, I did have things that were positive in my life as well. So I had aunties, I had, as I said, extended family. So I had a beautiful area to grow up and play in. So those were things that kept me going. So often I think you can't sort of you know, focus on the negative. I don't know where I got that, but I always tried to keep things pretty positive and stay optimistic and not sweat the small stuff, but focus on the big things to be thankful for and grateful for.
That sounds like an incredible mindset, and so important right now, particularly, you know, being 14 months into a pandemic. I think that there's a lot of things that can be difficult each day, but a positive mindset, like you said, can really make a difference. And actually, I'll ask you another question, and this is a question that we asked on Thursday evening at our community activism of Indigenous women and Two-Spirit peoples panel that we hosted. So we closed out the panel with a question: what brings you hope? So I'd like to pose that to you as well, as, you know, in the day-to-day and with everything that's going on, what gives you hope, and what brings you a sense of hope?
Oh, that one's easy. I every time I hear in my community of a young woman starting a business, for instance, every time I hear of some young person in my community getting an award or being recognized for something, my heart just soars, I tell you, you know, because in my day you could count maybe, you know, just a small handful of people that actually went to college, very small handful of people who actually accomplished something, you know, noteworthy. But now it's like I stopped counting. I can't keep up anymore. It's just so, you know, people just have this entrepreneurial spirit and this drive to succeed at times. I'm not going to say it's across the board. We still have a lot of young people who are struggling with addictions and you know, mental health issues, absolutely. But we have more that are doing well and trying despite all of those things. So every time I see a young person or a child or a happy kid, I'm totally hopeful.
that sounds like a really great, so many great ways of bringing hope and joy, and that sort of covers off another question that we had.
But one more thing, I'm looking at a picture right here in front of me. So sometimes we deal with very heavy jobs and difficult work. Sometimes I work on files like missing and murdered Indigenous women, or other issues that are heavy. But I keep these pictures around of kids in my eyeshot. They could be photos of a school that I visited where we opened and the kids sang, or another photo of another child. So that gives me positive energy when I'm working, for instance, because definitely the pandemic, you have to be concerned about and find those strategies. So I wish I could show you, but I would probably knock this iPad down if I start showing you, but some beautiful kids pictures. Go ahead with your question. Yeah.
Oh no, I think that's great. And actually it blends right into the next question. So this is a question from Hermona. So Hermona asks a couple of questions. So I'll try and summarize. But for you, what have been some of the biggest changes in the public service that you have noticed over your career, as well as what can the Canadian Federal Public Service do to continue to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our work, and where can we go from here?
Most definitely, I would think that is the biggest transformation that I've seen, and I'm seeing now. I definitely did not see many Indigenous people in the public service when I joined 24 years ago. Definitely see a lot more now, and I would say that that's probably the case for racialized communities and religious minorities and so on. But I would say we absolutely moved forward on that after the murder of George Floyd and the tragedy that occurred there, and the tragedy of Joyce Echaquan and so on. Many of these events definitely, created a trajectory and change in the public service, which I'm so happy about. Lots of initiatives underway. The clerk, made a call to action, which was challenging leaders across the public service. We worked on deputy minister commitments so that from the top, that change would occur, supporting networks so the change would occur from the grassroots. And this was underway very, very quietly in many respects by many managers who took that leadership. But now it's spurred into something much, much bigger, and we're only at the cusp of that. So I'm seeing that change. Another change that I'm happy to have been part of was in gender-based analysis plus, and which was also kept by the public service on a sort of a simmering way over the last number of years. But a number of years, it's 5 years ago maybe, there was definitely a push to embed and integrate gender-based analysis plus in all the policies and programs and operations and initiatives of public servants. Still a work in progress, but definitely something that has been transformational in nature for policy people. Thanks.
And maybe just to piggyback on that, I know that you have had an incredible career. So maybe my next question would be, how did you find the transition into the public service from your first position as executive director of health and social services in your community, and maybe what are some of the differences, what are some of the similarities, and what are the skills that you've been able to use and bring into all of your positions in the public service?
Yeah, so I worked in the community, as you mentioned, for a number of years, but during that time before I joined the public service, I also worked for an organization called the Assembly of First Nations, which is an organization representing First Nation community leaders across the country. And I worked there for a number of years and was, received some really great mentoring from a leader there called Ovid Mercredi. And many young people may not remember him, but the older ones would remember National Chief Ovid Mercredi. and he was quite instrumental in my career. So it was from there that I actually went into the public service, which I absolutely didn't want to do. I had no no inclination of joining the federal government. I often laugh about the fact that Ovid Mercury had me organizing anti-government protests. Actually, that was what I was doing when I was with the Assembly of First Nations during his time. So so the thought of, entering the evil empire, as we put it, or, the dark side, or the Borg, or what have you, was definitely not something that I had as my career objective. At the time, I was an advocate. I was a protester. I was on a different angle. So, but I wanted to stay in Ottawa. I loved Ottawa, and I had a couple of kids by then, and I didn't think I was going to move back to the reserve by that point. And so someone really talked me into joining the public service and getting a different perspective, which we should all get in our careers, is a completely different perspective at times. And so I did join, and I have to say I never ever regretted doing that. It's been the best career ever, and I've seen things and I've done things that I would have never conceived possible. Despite the fact that I didn't want to join and I didn't think that was the place for me, I've actually felt that I had more influence with policy than I did from the outside. So that is where I started to understand that I can make a difference in the world and in Canada by being internal to the process. And so, I've been involved in a lot of great things, but I've also been involved in stopping a lot of dumb things from happening within the government, because believe it or not, some people have really dumb ideas throughout the years. So when you can look at a briefing note and you can actually correct it from, being a dumb piece of advice to a minister, you don't get kudos for that, but public servants do that a lot. So that's the wonderful thing about this type of career. But thanks for the question.
I absolutely love that. I love the idea of doing so much good work, and also preventing some not so good work to happen. So thank you so much for all of that insight. We have a question in the Q&A, which I'll read out. So we have a question saying that someone would be grateful to hear about the importance of elders, and specifically inclusion and intersectionality is often spoken about, but it is often the case that elders, or talking about the leaders of the past, are not necessarily part of the conversation. So could you possibly talk about how young folks can value and include elders as well?
Well, diversity and intersectionality is all about bringing all types of perspectives to the table, to the understanding. When you bring elders to that table, the conversation shifts dramatically, because they can definitely advise, not from just a place of wisdom and guidance, but to avoid the mistakes that have been made in the past. Now, our elders have seen so much, and they've experienced so much, and they've made mistakes, and they've seen mistakes, and they've seen good things that happen and how good things happen. So having elders as part of your team, as part of your advisors, is definitely going to make for better policy and programs and activities. And I encourage it, not just in an Indigenous context, but in any organization, having that wise voice that it could be someone retired and has a perspective. I know that there's so many elders in the women's movement, and maybe they feel strange being called elders, but from my perspective, it's a compliment when you're actually someone starts to recognize or call you an elder. It's like, oh my God, like it's such an honor, and it's not something to be taken any differently than that. So I'm not there yet, but I'm going to be there maybe someday. And so my participation, my advice in processes and things moving forward when I'm an elder, I'm going to be so happy to contribute to that conversation.
Thank you. I think that that's a really wonderful way of putting it, is, by having those intergenerational aspects and in community involvement, everyone's bringing something to the table and saying, okay, well, this is how we have learned over our years. This is how we've made mistakes and grown from that. And I do think that that's a huge part of organizing and even in the government and outside of government is, we're all going to make mistakes, because, we're all human. We're not going to be 100% of the time, but those are not necessarily negatives. That's something that we can learn from and take and grow and integrate it to work towards an even better future.
Oh, I've had my share of mistakes. I'll tell you, that's absolutely true. They're all good learnings. They all feed your wisdom.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Is it's definitely all part of learning. So I see we have a ton of great questions in the conversation. Let's see, 1 second. So we have a question here. So how can Women's March Ottawa, as well as other feminist organizations, support the truth and reconciliation process?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's great when questions like that are asked. How can an organization support reconciliation? How can an organization support the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations? And I would also include, the calls to justice coming out of the inquiry of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, where I think the women's WMO can actually look in that direction as well, to support actions, concrete actions moving forward. And I think that's where we need to get to is we're talking about it a lot, which is great. But what do we actually do as individuals, as organizations that are translated into concrete actions is where we need to get to. So it is something that we think about and we do every day, as opposed to just think about. So I would encourage, to hire an Indigenous student or recruit an Indigenous student, recruit Indigenous volunteers, make the organization, one that Indigenous young women will want to embrace. What will that take? Well, I don't know, actually, not being a young Indigenous woman anymore, I'm not sure what that would take. So it would be important to work with young Indigenous women to actually understand what would make this organization important to them and want to be a part of. I'm sure you do have Indigenous involvement, not saying that you don't, but it definitely makes a difference when some Indigenous women will actually feel a part of the organization. And I'm talking about girls, women, and two-spirited people as well. So I'd love to see that happen, and I'd be happy to also help you make those connections. Although you probably have them yourself, Emily, but there's a lot of great women's organizations out there. I'm working currently with a whole number of women's organizations on the action plan for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I have to say that they're some of the most amazing women leaders that I've ever worked with. So that's what I would suggest. And your finance person is Indigenous, so that's awesome.
Yes, Women's March Ottawa has, so Trina, who is our treasurer for Women's March Ottawa, I'll give a quick shout out, has just been absolutely phenomenal, doing so much behind the scenes work. And I'm sure so often so much of the work that gets done isn't necessarily in the spotlight, but it still contributes to such an important work, and making sure that everything can run smoothly. So going back maybe to the public service, and maybe this is a question for Gina Wilson at the beginning of her career. So if you were to have, a 10-minute conversation with young Gina Wilson, who's just about to start the public service, what would you say to her? What now that you are where you are, had such a phenomenal career, what are some advice and ideas that you would love to pass down to your younger self, but also a new generation of younger public servants, sort of just at the beginning of their career?
That's a great question. And I'd probably start with my public service career in the First Nation public service, so which is also public service. And it was kind of an experience that really helped me focus for the rest of my career. It was actually kind of a mistake I'd made. I was starting a women's circle, and I was called up to the leadership, who were very concerned about what this was. Is this the opposition? What are you going to be doing? There was a lot of skepticism and concern about starting. Then I was saying, it's simple. We're just going to come together and talk about our issues. There's abuse in the community. And the leadership was going, oh no, don't open that thing up. That's a whole can of worms. We're not going to be able to deal with that. People are going to be shooting each other, and so on and so forth. Well, went ahead anyway and sort of organized it somehow. But I started to feel a lack of support and starting to be questioned. And I thought I was kind of smart and I knew it all. And I'd been to university, and come on, like I know what we need to do here. And so I didn't actually. I thought I did, but I didn't. So the lesson that came out of that was really, and I would tell this to my young public service self, is to communicate your vision. Communicate what it is you want to do, and communicate it effectively. Because I had talked about what I was trying to do with my employees, and they were supportive, they understood, they got it. I had spent a lot of time talking to my partners in the community about some of the things that I was doing. They supported it, they understood it, but I didn't take a lot of time to fill in my superiors or my bosses or the chief, and I just assumed that they knew more than me, so they should know, understand what I'm doing. And so I left a job in not a great way, kind of pissed off and not happy about that support. All of those things that I was working on ended up happening anyway, because it was the right thing to do. It was the right policy approach to take, what have you, but it occurred in its own time. And so I would say that never get discouraged when you're not feeling support from a partner or an employee or a superior in that regard, because maybe you're not communicating it effectively enough. So I would do that. That's my advice to my younger self. Don't get too discouraged if you're finding lack of support.
I think that's such a great answer. And I think that at the beginning of so many folks' careers, it's like, okay, I'm gonna go out and change the world. And there's a sense of optimism, but there's also, a sense of lots of learning and lots of opportunities of like, oh, okay, this is a new context, a new opportunity. So the idea that, open communication is so important. And I'm seeing in the chat some folks saying I so needed to hear that. So thank you. And I know that definitely that will go to the heart of a lot of folks, myself included. So I'm seeing another question in the chat. We'll probably take one or two more questions, and then we'll pass it over to Elder Irene Compton for our closing. So, all right. This one's a bit of a long question, but it says, how can we advocate or push the federal government to implement the calls for justice? So specifically in regards to the National Inquiry for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Two-Spirit people. There's so much incredible material there, but we still seem to be so far away from so many of the calls, such as basic income, access to clean water and housing, and the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in the criminal justice system, as well as how can folks outside of the public service support the implementation of these calls to justice and hold the government accountable?
That's a great question. And maybe you could do what I do, and which is actually join the public service and make change and influence that from within. I know that the public service is always looking for good talent, or maybe you could just get involved in some initiative that is moving some of those pieces forward. I would say, for instance, if it is about clean water, how can you understand that issue more? How can you develop actions around that particular issue? Or if it is, guaranteed income supplement, what have you, is understand it, advocate, influence, not just with the government, but with people around you, so that you're influencing others. There's nothing that influences the federal government more than Canadian citizens, quite frankly. It's being able to spread that word and have that influence wherever you go. Even if it's the family kitchen table dinner, or your relatives, those conversations make a difference in people's understanding of what the issues are. So, or get involved in organizations, non-government organizations or governmental organizations. Those are the types of things that make change, but it starts with you. It starts with you understanding what those changes are required. It requires you to have those discussions with Indigenous people, and ask them what they're doing to move those issues forward, how you can help them, and so on. So I know that we're working right now on an action plan to implement the calls to justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. It's going to be a long haul. It took a long time to get us to this absolute, most fundamental, abhorrent, racist behavior ever, which is the murder of Indigenous women and girls. It's going to take us a while to move out of this context. Girls and women and two-spirited people continue to go missing every day in this country, and it hasn't stopped. It's not stopping. And so definitely it is a much, much huger, complex issue that brought us to this type of these types of actions, this misogyny, this racism, this colonization, that it's going to take us years to move out, but it's going to take all of us to do that, each and every one of us, to bring us to a point. And it's going to take a lot of small steps and actions to get us out of it, and to be the country that we are supposed to be.
Thank you for that, and you're right. It is such a complex issue, but it is something that all of us can and should be getting involved in and working towards a more just and equitable society. So unfortunately, it looks like this will be our last question. But once again, Gina, thank you so very much. I wish this could be an all-day conversation. I wish this could be an in-person conversation, and I'm so excited for a time in which we can all gather together and spend time together and working towards that more just society that we're all hoping for. All right, so sure. Let's look at one last question from the chat. So how do we get communities to talk about communities and families that have been affected by domestic violence, and how can we support communities and families who have been who have been impacted by this?
Well, just from my own life learnings, I suppose, you know, to address this issue in my community, for instance, you know, we first needed data. We first needed numbers to understand the extent of the problem. We needed to understand what the issues were, and so on. So an exploration of that was the first thing that was absolutely necessary in building the services and the programs to support those women. We had to involve those women in those conversations. We had to actually involve the elders in those conversations. I remember getting my hands slapped a few times by some of the elders when we would do things a little differently. I remember the fact that I didn't know how to start a crisis shelter, so I actually went to non-Indigenous women who had crisis shelters and tried to learn about what they were doing. And I got a lot of learnings and teachings from that. But when I tried to bring all the ideas back, I got a bit nipped in the bud, because feminism at the time meant women. And for my elders, feminism meant men and women. And it meant balance, and so I was going in a bit of a wrong direction there. So I would think some of those learnings that I wanted to teach, and I use the pronouns she and her, and in Algonquin the pronoun is ween, W-I-N, with a little accent, and ween is it's not him or her or she or his, it's all the same. If I can say it that way. So just wanted to share that little teaching as I lost track of the question and just continue to blather. So it's all good. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you so much. I love the idea, you know, bringing everyone into the feminist conversation and feminism, not just being about women in particular. So thank you, Gina, so very much for this conversation. It's been phenomenal. I know that everyone signing on is lucky to be able to hear your wisdom. So thank you so much. And now I will pass it over to Elder Irene Compton to close us out for this afternoon, but also to close out the entire Women's March Ottawa spring program. So thank you everyone for joining us for today's conversation, and I look forward to a time where we can all get together again. So thank you so much for being here today.
Everybody, thank you, Gina. You've been really inspiring me through your wisdom and your leadership, and especially talking about your granny. And I truly believe that you are your granny. So it's just been a beautiful week. I've attended many of the sessions during the week, and I've learned a lot. And this is an incredible Women's March this year. We didn't get to march physically, but I think this virtual way of coming together was quite valuable. So, you know, in future years, we might want to do a little bit of both. So I'm going to close the week with the traveling song. And with that traveling song, we're sending all those ancestors back home to that spirit world, because they've been sitting in council with us all week, and they've been giving us those teachings and those little wisdoms to take away and practice in our journey now. So we're going to thank them for that and send them home. Have leads in our songs, and the lead in this song is hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh. And the people would sing back, hey, ah, hey, ah, hey, oh, hey, direction where the youth sit. This is the direction where most of you sit, the movers and the shakers. So this is our last round, and this is in the direction of the grandmothers and all their wisdom. So let's sing them home. Have a good Mother's Day and a beautiful weekend. Chimiwech.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.